The candidates tournament has finally begun. 8 players are battling it out over the next 2.5 weeks in Khanty-Mansiysk in Siberia to decide who will become the next challenger to Magnus Carlsen in the World Championship. That match will take place in November. But here we go, round 1 of the candidates. Well, the players, or at least some of the players, were quite cautious in how they started the tournament. Dmitry Andreikin played very solidly against Kramnik, risked nothing, and that game ended fairly quickly in a draw. Then we had Sergei Karyakin against Peter Svidler. Well, that was quite a tense opening, but in quite a sharp position, the players decided to repeat the position rather than risking anything too much, so that game ended in a draw. But there was more going on in Shahriar Mamedyarov against Vasilin Topalov. Mamedyarov was better out of the opening. We joined the game after 27 moves. You can see that Mamedyarov has active pieces here. All his pieces are active, in fact. And he's pressing on this weak pawn here on b6. Topi is definitely worse here. He's struggling. But, how should White try to increase the pressure? He's got to be careful about taking this pawn too quickly. Remember, a knight could come there with a nasty fork. But there are various ways that White could try to increase the pressure. I mean, I think this is a good move, just to take away the square for the knight here. I also like rook here, just to increase the pressure on b6, and it seems to me that black is struggling here. Instead, Mamedyarov played bishop a3. Now, this seems reasonable to keep the bishop nice and protected, keep this pawn protected, so you're preventing any capture here. But he'd forgotten something. He'd forgotten that Topalov could force an exchange of rooks. Of course, the rook is pinned to the knight, so that rook has to, well, do something anyway. I mean, the obvious move is to trade. But here, black has largely solved his problems. The rook can't come to c7 because of knight d5. And, yeah, it's very difficult to see how white is going to make progress there. Instead of that, Mamedyarov lunged forward with rook c7. Now, this is dangerous. You can see there's a threat. Now, really, there's no better move than to take the rook. So Mamedyarov is a rook down, but he's about to get back some material. And now he has a choice. He can check here or check here. Let's have a look at knight c6 check first. And this looks extremely dangerous. White has a bishop and a pawn for a rook. The rook looks wonderful here, so does the knight. And black's rooks are rather, well, they're split, they can't coordinate. But there is a saving move for black here. He can play rook, takes pawn check. Now he recovers some material, and although, well, white still has an active rook, but that game should end in a draw. Too many pawns have been taken off the board. So instead, Mamedyarov tried to check here. Now, this looks very dangerous. We've got a knight fork. Better not go to b7. That would be catastrophic. That's actually checkmate. So the king has to come back. And now, of course, white would like to just recapture here. But there's a problem. The rook is supported by the bishop, and we can knock out that bishop. And after this, well, once again, it's rather similar to the previous variation. Black survives here. So instead, Mamedyarov captured the bishop on g7. Still looks extremely dangerous, but with this move, Topalov just about holds his position together. So there's a threat to take the bishop and take the knight. And white's coordination is destroyed with this move. I mean, the best that white has now is just to check. and the king can't escape these checks. And the players repeated the position, so that game also ended in a draw, so 3 draws. But there was one game that was still going on, and that was the game between Vishwanathan Anand and Levon Aronian. Levon Aronian, the big favourite for this tournament on paper, playing against Vishy Anand, who of course lost his world title in November and has been struggling for form over the past, 3 years really. So, and for many people it was a big surprise that Anand actually wanted to take part in this candidates tournament after suffering such a crushing defeat to Carlsen in November. We joined the game after 18 moves. Aronian has played a kind of martial gambit. You can see that Anand is a pawn up. And Aronian has typical compensation. These bishops look very well placed. Very free play for his pieces. The rooks are well coordinated. But here Aronian played this move, which was perhaps a little bit casual. Perhaps he felt that white couldn't do much. And maybe he should play his knight in here straight away. And, well, black has typical martial compensation. And now, maybe moving this knight to f4, maybe bring it round here. You can see that white is struggling to bring this rook into play. Anyway, h6 happened, and now an excellent move from Anand, very pragmatic move. Instead of hanging on to this pawn, he returned it, but got very good play. So, really there's nothing better for black. He has to exchange this off. And now they went into an endgame. It's also a bit unpleasant. Aronian could avoid this endgame like this, but after this move with the 2 bishops, white has much easier play than black, and this bishop isn't very good as it's blunted by the pawn on f3. Okay, instead they went into this endgame, and now an excellent move from Anand. He played the rook over, so this will prevent, it means the bishop can move. Now there's no longer a pin, and puts the question to the knight. Now Aronian was maybe a little bit too casual again. He played the knight to f6. Maybe he should have just compromised and given back a pawn, so white is able to invade on the 7th rank, but black also invades. Now white captures a pawn, but this is not simple for white to play when this rook is so active here. Well, who knows, this rook might swing across to attack this one as well. So black definitely has play there. So Aronian played the knight to f6. It looks okay. Of course, black would very much like to force a trade of bishops. That would simplify his defensive task, but excellent move from Anand, c4. So trying to break open the queen side for his bishops, but also he would like to get some pressure on the c-file for his rook as well, and takes away the d5 square for the time being. Of course, if this is taken, then the pawns are split, and that's very pleasant for white. Very easy to play, and it's not easy for black. Aronian thought for a very long time here trying to solve his problems. For example, if he pushes forward, then white can break open the position like this. It's tough. After a long think, he played c6. It looks a bit odd to block in the bishop, but the idea is to try to bring this bishop round. Okay, Anand just played his rooks into the middle. You can see that it's very difficult for black to target anything in white's position. This pawn very well placed on h3, controlling the knight squares. And yeah, very difficult to find counterplay. The rooks are beautifully blocked by this solid bishop on e3. Rook came back, so that means that if the pawn takes, he can recapture with this pawn, and the 7th rank is defended. But Anand just played a4. Excellent move, so he's looking to just isolate this pawn on b5, and then he can attack it with his rooks, beautifully placed rooks. So Aronian took on c4, which, well, look at those pawns, really ugly, split. But at least he gains a nice square for this knight in the centre of the board. Still, very unpleasant position for black to play. And this rook is running very short of squares. And you can see white can just build his position very slowly, very easily. White has time, black does not. So Aronian tries to bring this bishop round back into play. But notice that pawn is permanently under threat. Now, nice move from Anand, just removing the bishop. Very solid. You can see this bishop is tucked away, out of danger, but still attacks the pawn on a6, controls very important squares, for instance e2. And now a great manoeuvre from Anand. He simply brings his rook round to attack on the b file, and it's very unpleasant, and to attack from b6 or b8. Okay, the knight is pushed out of the way, the bishop comes back, and now bishop a5. So if the rook comes up the board, well, you have to be very careful that something nasty doesn't happen here. So the rook came here, solid, but rook b6, and well, I think already Aronian is probably lost in this position, both pawns under attack, and once again, zero counterplay for black. The finish was rather elegant. Let's just see what happened. I mean, really, I don't think there's any decent defence here. If the rook comes back, you just take here and take on c6, clear extra pawn. Aronian played knight d5, and now there was a trade of pieces. And if the knight retreats, then c6 drops, knight takes. Now this is a classic kind of position. You can see this knight is trapped at the edge of the board by that bishop. Typical domination in bishop versus knight endgames. And Anand finished the game perfectly here. Rook threatens the knight. The bishop has to defend. And the end is like a study. Watch what happens. Okay, the knight has no good square, so bishop b5 is the best to try. And now a really tricky move from Aronian. Of course, if this is taken, then rook d2 check, and black survives. Take back the bishop. But instead, bishop takes. Now, again, Anand has to be careful. This knight is still trapped, but if he wanders across carelessly with this move, then knight c4 is a great save. If pawn takes knight, then rook takes bishop. So instead, he's very careful. He played king e3, so obviously protecting the bishop, and that means that knight c4 just isn't possible. But okay, what about knight d1 check? But then the king just nudges back to e2, and now the knight is trapped. So instead, rook e8 check. King comes back. Threat still, bishop takes knight, so the rook pins again. And now once again, it's like the sister variation of now knight c4 again saves black because of the threat here. But instead Anand played king c3, and here Aronian resigned, because if knight d1 check, again, it's the mirror image of this previous variation. The knight is trapped. Total domination by the bishop. This was classic Anand. Would you believe it? The player who many people felt was the person least likely to qualify in this tournament, Viswanathan Anand, playing against the bookies' favourite, Levon Aronian, and Anand has won. So after round one, Anand is the only player with 1 point. The rest drew, and of course he defeated Aronian, who has 0. 14 rounds, still a long way to go, 13 rounds still to play.